Ya'ate, hello. Welcome to Real Native Roots, Untold Stories, a podcast by a Native woman with deep roots, hosted by yours truly, Vickie Boy Oldman. I am a lover of stories, a connector, and a holder of wisdom keepers. Each month, we will be connecting with our Native relatives and exploring what medicine our guests share and offer to us. Please join me on this uncharted journey to learn, connect, and reflect. Ayahat. Thank you. Ya'ate, hello everyone. How are you doing? It is another beautiful day. I'm just blessed. I'm blessed to be here on this planet another day. I know there's a lot going on around us, and we're all probably feeling triggered and afraid. And I try to ground myself in knowing that we've been through hard times before and that collectively we pray for one another and try our best to find small joys to remember that we're all still trying to do our own work, our work for the community. And so I just leave that with you. I am going to jump right into a reading. As you all know, those of you that are new, maybe, I always like to read a poem or a short story from one of our Indigenous people or person of color. And so I'm going to do a small reading from a book that a friend gave me. It's called Becoming a Matriarch by Helen Knott. I'm going to read interlude number 4. And how I find these sometimes, depending on the book that I get or the poem of books, I just kind of just scan, and wherever it stops, that's what I read. So I don't really do a lot of searching. I just allow, creator, spirit, universe to find the reading. So this is the reading. I found a lot of joy in reading. So here we go. My eldest auntie is technically my great aunt, but I never call her that because I wasn't raised to define relationships with prefixes. In another tribe, she would be called my grandma. There are no second or third cousins in my family, only cousins. And the older cousins act like second moms or uncles or aunties to the younger ones. I don't usually refer to great great grandpas or grandmas with a series of greats. I just call them grandma or grandpa. If I do use these, it's usually when I'm telling a story and know that the listener will need to situate themselves in a timeline. In everyday life, everything and everyone feels so much closer in Indian country. That's so true. The English language creates distance between us all. One day, I called my auntie and told her that I was searching for words in our language that could speak to the work I was doing with facilitation and speaking. I told auntie I wanted to help people remember who they are. I want them to reconnect with themselves and sweep away all the stuff that gets piled on top of us in this world so we can see again. It is about understanding the old here in the now, I explained. Auntie asked for a few days to think about it. As promised, she called me a few days later with a phrase, it's in her indigenous language, which basically means, I remember things from long ago. And just like that, I understood my purpose in becoming a writer. I am a living memory keeper, a comical task to give a recovering alcoholic with over a decade's worth of memory coming in patchy or not coming in at all. Yet here I am, the living memory of my mother, staring into the face of the lapsing memory of my grandmother. I gather stories to pass them on. I do my best to remember old things or uncover ancient knowledge that may already exist within. I spend time in conversation, therapy, and in silence to recall and discover long hidden parts of myself. What does it mean to remember things from long ago? More importantly, what does it mean to remember things from long ago while living fully in the present. Mm, God, I love this. I love it so much because this is what I'm trying to do. Well, I'm not trying to do it. I am doing it in collecting untold stories from our indigenous people. And there's so much wisdom. And can you imagine if we really slowed down and took time and just listened deeply to people and their stories? We are probably missing so much wisdom that we could be applying to our lives to heal, to grow, to help. And so, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it because I did. And I loved also how she had mentioned about how we name our relatives and how it brings us so much closer in Indian countries. So, anyway, without further ado, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to introduce our guests. I'm so excited. I have not met this woman in person, but we connected not too long ago just to talk about what are we going to talk about. And you know how we are in our communities. We start we're talking about one thing and it leads to another, and so I'm really looking forward to it. And we have someone at mutual that actually connected us, and so she was a podcast guest a couple of years ago. So I just again want to welcome you all back to Real Native Roots Untold Stories. Today, we are joined by a fierce, visionary artist whose work speaks to legacy, identity, and healing through every shell, every stitch, and every story told through wearable art. Shoshoni Hostler is a Yurok fashion designer, regalia maker, therapist, mother of five, and advocate deeply rooted in her Northern California homelands. She has crafted over 26 traditional shell dresses, believed to be the most by any Yurok person. And she continues to merge the ceremonial with the contemporary through her contour pieces. Her work recently lit up Native Fashion Week, going viral with over 1.3 million views, not only for the striking beauty, but for the powerful cultural reclamation it represents. As a regalia maker turned fashion designer, she is walking a delicate and intentional line, preserving traditional while boldly taking up space in a world not always built for us. In her day job, she serves as a behavioral health director for the Yurok tribe, helping to lead multimillion-dollar wellness initiatives for Native youth. And in all that she does on the runway or in the clinic, she reminds us not everyone can wear these garments, but everyone can feel the medicine in them. So, without further ado, I would love our guest to say hello, hear her voice, bring her voice in this beautiful space, and tell hello to our listeners and tell us a little bit more. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Ayukwi Nakna Shoshoni Hostler. I'm very pleased to be here, and that was quite an introduction, so I'm very touched by that. Yes, I am from Northern California. I am a Yurok tribal member. I have Tolowa, Chetco, Rogue River, and Karuk descendancy. And I'm a mother of five, very busy, but I love each and every moment of it. And I love being able to have those deep, connected conversations with people. So that is why I'm very excited about today's podcast.
Oh, welcome, welcome, welcome. What did you think of that little reading that I did? I was curious. Did it speak to you at all?
It did, and it made me think, and I think there are a couple components that I found very interesting. I loved the ending and the way that she brought it all together. For me, I felt kind of intrigued by the concepts in there. I, for one, really like to describe exactly where my relatives are, but I don't think that it brings a distance. I see it as like bringing closeness because I have the ability to place them and to also still connect through generations. So just because you're a further generation doesn't mean we're less connected, right? And so kind of honoring that too. And I do think that is the intent at the ending of where she brought it around to, and that's such a beautiful thing, being able to transcend time. And also, I think it's so important for Native people to know how they're connected and to be okay with complicated connections to people, right? And I also know, like my kids will call lots of people, auntie and uncle, and then when they ask exactly how, I'm like, well, we're not actually blood related. They're like a spiritual auntie, or I have lots of spiritual nieces and stuff like that. And so to be able to know too that you can connect and create your own sense of a family that you don't have to necessarily define by blood, I think is such a beautiful thing. I think another point that she made that is so relevant, and sometimes we talk about it and sometimes we don't, is the difference, the distinction between native languages and the meaning behind our words
Mm.
and the English language, because the English language is very flat. It doesn't really express to us and translate the way that our native language does. And so I think, being able to develop those labels or to use the exact reference of where they are to us can also mean something different, right? It can be more endearing at times. And so being able to kind of tap into that and also um, understand some of the non-Western concepts we have for those placements in our lives is really important because it's more descriptive. So I remember I have my great, great, great auntie Awak, meaning she's passed on, but Eileen Figueroa. She was a linguist, a very famous singer for us, and just an amazing person. And when I would sit and I would talk with her and she would have me sing for her and we would kind of have our interactions together, I would tell her that, remind her that she was my great aunt. And she would say, Numi, 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 Numi. Like she added more greats on there, right? And it was something that we would laugh about and stuff. And so she was able to kind of say, like, I'm this like very old elder, right? And we're connected in a very intimate way. So I think there's room for all of that as long as you come back to the ending point, which is how closely we all are tied and how long we've had those ties,
Mm,
right? Is that these ties are thousands and thousands of years old. So it's okay if it's further or closer.
mm. I love that. How do you say beautiful in your language?
Beautiful is Narau.
Narao?
Uh-huh.
Narao. Well, narao for your comments. Earlier, you had said, as you were responding to the reading, you had mentioned like land and connection. And I would love for you to share a little bit about your people and the land that has shaped you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great conversation to have because we are very land-based people, as most indigenous peoples are. But I think specifically when we're talking about um, my people and giving context to who I am and who we are up here in Northern California, for Yurok people, we were never seated off of our homelands. And
Mm,
so, and we also had the expansion came over much later. So I think that's a really great context to put out there too, just to give people that base is
mhm,
that, when settlers came to California, it was much later than other parts of America, right?
mhm,
We are the largest tribe in California by population, so that's important. We are very close to the Oregon border. We're coastal and inland as well, and our tribe runs along the river, and we're really stewards in this area. There's a lot of context that we can give to land for Yurok people. We are salmon people, we are river and ocean people, tide the waterways by our canoes. and our villages are really set amongst the riverways. We are strong advocates for our environment, and traditionally, we had and we still have our ceremonies, and our ceremonies are all, our highest ceremonies that we have are what we call our world renewal, which means we're praying for the world to renew and have all of the good stuff, right? And to continue to live in a very good way that we can sustain what we have. And we don't do that just for our people, we do it for the whole world. And that's so important, right? And so we have these types of formulas to be able to create balance,
Mm,
very much tied to place where we're at, how we're doing it. We do it all the same way since time immemorial. So when we put fire to the ground, meaning when we put our prayer fires in and the ceremony started, we've been doing that. Some of the traditional villages in Hoopa, they dated the prayer fire soil down, I think 12,000 years.
wow.
And so it is important when we say being tied, through generations, that practice-based knowledge. We've been practicing in the same way for 12,000 years. And I think that's a huge difference when we're talking about anything, right?
Yeah.
That we practice and we hone a skill and we hone knowledge through the act of doing and then receiving an outcome, right?
Mm. I just love what you had mentioned about prayer. I remember talking to this was a Pueblo elder, and they were saying, and it's totally in line with what you were saying, is that when you pray, you start with the world, you start bigger than you. You pray for that, and you slowly bring in, right, like the planets, the animals, the living beings out there. Eventually, then the people and your relatives, and you're the last one that you pray for yourself. It's like big, and it comes in. And I just thought that was so beautiful because it's it's like there are things bigger, and those things help us to be and shape us who we are. So when you said that, I thought about that person. I thought, oh my God, there's alignment there in how they do that. And I know, like, in for our people, it's the same way, in how they pray big first, and then coming down to our humble selves.
Mhm.
And I love when you said practice-based knowledge. We've been doing this for a long time,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you just naming that, because um, we know the formulas, and we got to continue to, like, practice so we keep those. I love that. Tell me a little bit about what you carry with you from, like, your grandparents, your parents, maybe even your childhood, that shows up in who you are today. A
Mhm.
little bit about your roots there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up actually with my grandparents on the reservation in Klamath, California. And, to be honest, I got a lot of trauma in my childhood.
Mm,
You know, I I,
mhm.
um, I had a very special relationship with my dad who's passed on. And actually, that trauma background has actually given me a lot of blessings in my adult life, really, because those are lived experiences, right? That you won't have context and skill and resiliency around if you hadn't had it. So, in a way, I do really appreciate that that's part of my journey now, that I've found ways to find positives within those experiences as the outcome, right? So I want to make that very clear. And also, it shaped me to really be a strong person later. But my dad has really been the person who, as far as when I'm thinking about investing in me in a positive way, that was really my dad because, out of all of his experiences, I really seen the human condition in like a fuller spectrum, right? Where I could see the resiliency and the ability to be humble and to really reshape and be okay with who you are, right? And he also is the person who would tell me like how to cultivate my own personal medicines, right? Like what do you do to when you to center yourself and rebalance and to carry medicine with you and to let things brush off of you and to physically brush it off of you sometimes if you need to, right? As a way to like recenter yourself and to really show like that unconditional love. Those are the things that I got from my dad, even though, for a period of my childhood, we were away from each other, but that will never go away, right? But I also had like all of these really amazing elders that were alive, in my childhood who really, really invested in the children in Klamath and would come and they would teach us and they would share their stories and they would connect in that way. And so I never felt like, even though I didn't get it within my immediate home, that I didn't have it. Especially when I go into the schools and I interact with youth now, that is a difference. Is we had a little bit more access to our elders in that way who are no longer here. So I very much appreciate that because they always encouraged me and they freely shared their knowledge with me, and it felt like an investment. It felt like I was worth it.
Mm, that's just shows an example of what community means,
Yeah.
right? And our indigenous communities, our native communities is communities help us in different ways, whether it's support spiritually, emotionally, physically, culturally. Uh, that's why we rely on community because not our inner family dynamic sometimes may not be there in that way.
Yeah.
What's a funny story that comes to mind right away about you and your papa?
Oh, my dad? Oh my gosh, my dad was he was so funny. And actually in high school, it would kind of annoy me, because I would tell this corny joke to my friends or something and they wouldn't laugh. They would be like, "That's so dumb," or something like that. And then they would come over and he would tell the dumbest jokes and they were like, "Your dad's the best." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. That's not fair because I don't get to tell the corny jokes and get a laugh." But he was always a trickster, and that was something that, in my adolescence when I felt like I was too cool and my early 20s and stuff, and, when you're just annoyed with your parents and you're like, "Come on, can you be serious sometimes?" Or "Don't act that way," or "We're in public," and, and things like that. But, like, really looking back, he taught me that it's totally okay to, like, be outside the norm and kind of in your behavior, right? Like if it works for you and it makes you feel good and it's authentic to yourself, as long as it's, you know, I think not harmful, then have that levity. So I had to get reminded of that sometimes too. And my husband is similar in that way of like lightning and having that levity, which is I have to try to remember to add that in. And some people that's their natural gift. And so he was like that.
Mm. It's so interesting how Creator always puts people in our space to remind us about things that we're working on,
Yeah.
and accepting all parts of ourselves because, we're hard on ourselves a lot of times. And so it's always good to have people who are light and remind us to laugh at ourselves and to embrace all those moments. Speaking of like embracing yourself and seeing new meaning, tell us a little bit about your name. I love that story, and would love for folks to hear about your name and what's it mean to you now as you're walking in this world.
Yeah, it's come up recently, and it's really made me think, and I really love the meaning behind it. So my name's Shoshoni, my dad was adamant that that was always his choice of name for me is I was always going to be Shoshoni. And my mom says she has a different version. She said she was going to name me Sarah, he was going to name me Cheyenne, and they compromised on Shoshoni. So two versions. Not exactly sure where the truth lies, but the name Shoshone, so I met some Shoshone natives and we were talking and they asked me, they said, "Do you know what your name means?" And I said, "I don't." And they said that it means snake eater. And at the time I was like, "Yikes." But they said, it's actually this really good thing, right? Is to be able to take this thing that is scary and powerful and to be able to conquer it, right? Is to have that inner strength to be able to do that and to be brave and to act in that way. And I hope my story is representative of how impactful and what that actually represents. But that's what was communicated to me. And so they're like, see it as a good thing, like that's that inner strength and that ability to do that. And I was like, okay, that I can get behind that. That sounds better. But, I think too, it kind of like, when I heard that I was in my early 20s and now, through life, really having that understanding that, snakes aren't necessarily bad things. There's many, many representations for what they mean, and some could be good and some could be bad. And really understanding, your time and place and what you actually believe about it, because it's not just a Western perspective of that snakes are evil or bad. So I've enjoyed learning that too.
Hmm. There's always so much like unlearning,
Yeah.
right? I feel like so much unlearning from what we were told about specific maybe things and animals or even concepts. And then when we really dig in to our native ways and stories, there's balance of beauty and also challenges. And it's not just the way it's presented. So anyway, it's you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unlearning and things that we thought. So, and I also love when you named like, there are different views. There's a view from your dad and there's a view from your mom. And that was true for them, right? And so and then there's a view that you have about where you're landing with your name. But I love that story and I'm very happy that you have embraced the power and the beauty of that. Tell us about your journey from regalia maker to fashion designer. How did that unfold? And maybe there was a person who maybe planted that seed. I don't know when that seed was planted. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, to start off with my first getting into my journey of being a regalia maker, I was in my early 20s and I had this amazing elder, Awak Georgina Troll in my life. And she was like, one day we were talking, they said, "I think you can make this, this piece of regalia." And somebody else said, "Yeah, I think you could too." And they said, "You know how to make this other thing, and I think that you should try it." So I tried it and I got their feedback and I made some adjustments, and because it was a men's piece for our high ceremonies. So I wasn't really sure, but I was getting the feedback from the elders that were men. I was getting the feedback from the elders that were female. And then she said, I think she gave me all of the stuff to make my first shell dress. And our shell dresses are very elaborate, very heavy. It takes a lot of time and energy and a long time to create one. And she gave me the materials to make one. She had started the apron on it. She gave me all the materials to make the dress. And she said she wanted me to have it and that she knew that I would make it. And then you're tasked with something you can't say no to, right? There's no way that I could then move forward without creating this dress. I had never made it, and it's like the most elaborate piece of regalia we can make for our tribal people up there. And I had these tall orders. So sadly, she passed before it was finished, but I did make the dress. That was the first dress I made. And I have made 26 ceremonial dresses altogether, which is quite a bit of work. And I don't know any other Yurok person who has made as many dresses that we can name or reference. And I've made them for lots and lots of different families, and through that process, it's really like you're not creating this inanimate object, right? Like
Mhm.
it is a spiritual journey because you have to be in the right mindset. You have to kind of be in this meditative state, right? Where you let your thoughts come in and out and you don't really stick to one train of thought, that it's like a free flowing thought process, right? But how we believe about it is that the thing is becoming its own spirit. It's becoming its
Mhm.
own thing. And so you're in this intimate process of getting to know something without fighting the process of what it wants to be. And so I really try to do that. I really try to not impose how I want it to be as much as like I have an idea of what I'll make before I start. And then I just start and I jump in and I just kind of like freely let it happen without overthinking and creating barriers and putting it down and feeling frustrated. I really just like to be curious about how it will be, um, and give into that process. And in doing so, it is such an intimate and deeply connected process that and I've always been interested in fashion and I've always been interested in being a designer. But at the time that I started Regalia there, I didn't know anything about native fashion. I never had seen it. I couldn't look it up. There weren't places for me to reference what this even looked like. And so I was like looking into that in my early 20s. And then I really was just creating and being a regalia maker for 20 years. And then about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, some of my contemporary jewelry pieces, because I started my contemporary jewelry business the same time that I started Regalia. And that business is called Narawakar. My Beautiful Beads, which was also named by Awak Georgina Troll, that elder that was really influential in my life. And
Mhm.
through that journey, I had some people that would regularly buy pieces for the red carpet and stuff. And I was like, this is my opportunity to really do things how I want to do and really expand what I feel I can do as wearable art, because I already do this thing that is the epitome of the thing that I can do, right? Is being a regalia maker and making prayer items and giving that to other people that then use it as a communal prayer. That is the best thing I feel like we can do, right? Or I can do. So I'm like, I already can do this. If I can do this, I can take that energy and be fierce in these other spaces too, that can have a meaningful impact for me and for other people, and also like create pathways and influence people's identity and the way that they feel about themselves, which is also deeply impactful. And I want to do this. And I don't know the path. I have no idea, but I'll figure it out.
Mm.
Which is what I did.
Yeah. God, you said so much. I really, really appreciate you just explaining the process of what happens when you create a piece. And because you're naming the spirit of it and allowing it to be what it needs to be. I could see maybe some people are like, what? What does that mean? Because all the pieces at one point, I mean, they're alive. We have taken them from nature, or it was a living being at one point. It's still alive, right? It's almost like rebirth. It's a
Mhm.
rebirth, it's purpose, right? And I just think that's so beautiful. I love that when you had said, I just allow it to be and not fight with it. Cause I'm a very beginner rug weaver. And it's when I start, I'm like, I have this idea. This is what I'm going to do. And then I start. And then as I'm going, it totally takes shape in something else. And now I understand what's happening. But I have fun with it. I'm like, I'm still learning. I'm just playing. And I love how the elders, to me, what that's showing is like mentorship, because they're saying, hey, you can do this, and other people are like, yeah, and they're giving feedback, and they see potential, and so they're shaping and helping to support you. And I think that's so important. I feel like we need to do that more, and be okay with the feedback, because it's just going to help you in the process. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes Northern California regalia distinct, and like how do you carry that into your pieces? There's that, but it also made me curious too, like how long does it take for you to make, and I know it depends on what you're making, a regalia.
Mhm. Yeah, and we do have very distinct regalia here in California. And I think, California representation in general, just for natives within the state of California, compared to other indigenous communities across the United States, is severely underrepresented. And so a lot of people, including Native people, don't really have an understanding of what that looks like, right?
Mhm.
And for us here in Northern California, we are very intentional, purposeful people, even in our social interactions. And so what I mean by that is that we didn't have social gatherings just to have social gatherings. So our social gatherings were all ceremonial based, and regalia and communal prayer is all part of that. So, in our traditional shells, our clam shells, our abalone, our limpets, our olivella shells, those are all coastal shells. And there are thousands of shells per dress. And some of the dresses can weigh up to 50 pounds or more,
Wow.
and they're very elaborate. We also use cedar berry, which I think is called ghost berries or ghost beads in
Yeah.
other places, but we call them cedar berries. We have juniper berries. We have pine nuts, our braided bear grass, and we braid and weave our bear grass in multiple different ways. So, and we use it for other intents and purposes too, because we're phase based. So, at different phases of your life, there might be a ceremony and then you transition into a different phase. You're slowly becoming someone different, right? And bear grass can help kind of mark those phases of someone's life. And so in that way, we wear our maple bark skirts is one of the two kind of everyday type of dresses that we had. And then we would be not covered on top, right? And then we also had leather skirt or dress that looks like one of our shell dresses, but without the adornment of the shells and the grass and the pine nuts. And it would just be a plain leather skirt. It's two pieces, right? So our dress is what we call a dress, is actually an apron in the front and then a piece of leather wrapped around the back. So it's waist down. And in our ceremonies, the girls wear necklaces on top, and our dresses traditionally were backless. And the shape that necklaces are in is very important too, because there is a spiritual connection to why we leave that open and what it does, right, within ceremony. And so in translating, because I'm not taking regalia and putting it necessarily on the runway, what my intention is to let you have an understanding of what traditional design looks like, because everything we do for a great amount of time is based on intent and purpose. So to carry that forward, I have to incorporate that in a way that is new but old
Mhm.
and take you on this journey. And so I do a lot. I create halter tops or tops that are open in the back to honor that we can wear it and we can be in that way. And you can choose to put a shirt on under it. You can choose to do all these different things. And I think that that concept of modesty versus like having to cover up and be reserved is like a Western mindset that traditionally my people didn't have and we still don't, right? Is
Mhm.
and that's I think something to explore too is what our concepts of beauty are, and the fact that as different societies we can set the beauty standard and the expectation for that. And in indigenous communities, we do that, from tribe to tribe. How we dress and how we choose to look at a standard is different. We don't all have the same standard, and that's okay. And in, Northern California, where we weren't ceded off our territories, and we didn't lose our ceremonies, and there were parts that, of indigenous knowledge that's lost, but maintained our ceremonies. We're tied to the land. We've set the beauty standard for ourselves for time immemorial, and that continues, right? Because we're a living culture. Some people may appreciate that and some people may not, and that's okay too. But you will see that throughout my design. I try to really incorporate the traditional hang of our dresses, to incorporate the two pieces as a dress, to incorporate the backless components, because I don't have to be embarrassed, of
Yeah.
those components. And I think, I've seen that in ceremony too, where some young girls they'll want to wear a full shirt on top, and stuff. And I think, that makes me sad that they feel unsafe in that space, or they feel unsafe with their bodies, or unsafe with the standard of whether I should be modest or traditional, right?
Yeah. I think what you had said is so important for folks to know. Kind of goes back to the unlearning again, is that outside influences have made us feel shame about our body and how much we expose. Because in my culture, there are some ceremonies where you don't wear the top. And I just remember even like the puberty ceremony, like it's a sacred thing, but I just remember I was like really shy and embarrassed. Like, why are all these people here? They know what's going on with me, you know? And that's because of what was, programmed. Like, you cover up. Now that I'm older and a mom, and I understand. So there was that, but then there was something else you had said that made me think about, oh, how you said how there's a purpose and why we wear your necklaces a certain way. And it made me remember, back then, when we were given jewelry, that was your jewelry for like ever. Like that's what you wore all the time.
Mhm.
And then so when we're in ceremony, it helps to have the spirits, identify like, oh, that's Stephanie, she's in ceremony, and like it helps them to find us down here or something like that. So there's a lot of like similar pieces. Anyway, I just wanted to name those things. I think it's so beautiful. So thank you for sharing all of that, because I think it ties into what you were sharing with me recently, and that you had mentioned facing lateral violence and criticism about your viral video. What are some things people misunderstood about California tribes and your fashion work?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, sometimes o- we overlook California as having distinct tribal nations that have different regalia and different stories than us. And I think I also kind of felt like there was a pan expectation
Mm,
of what indigenous fashion looks like. And that is a really, to me, a misrepresentation of us as Indigenous people because we know that there are, over 500 distinct nations. So if you look at someone's story and you can visually see that it's different from your own people's, then recognize that that's not your story.
Oh,
We tend to, center ourselves in other people's story and then criticize that it's not our story, right?
yes.
And it's not supposed to be. So when the same that I can look and I often have to, right? Because I am in the minority, even in the indigenous world with representation. That's why what I do is so important because I often see things from the Southwest or plains or Alaskan tribes or, woodland tribes and tribes all over that have the representation and have the ability to be in those spaces. And yet there are a lot of tribal people who don't. And when they do try to get into those spaces, they may be the first person in their tribe. And so a lot of people don't have context. I think as Indigenous people, we need to recognize that there are so many of us who don't have access to those spaces or are creating paths themselves, and they may be the first one. So, first and foremost, understanding that my stuff won't look like your stuff because it's not supposed to. We're not the same peoples. We're both tribal Indigenous peoples, but what I do and where I come from is much different. And also, it's okay, and you can be advocates to me as an Indigenous person the same way that I've always been an advocate to you as an Indigenous person because I see you, because I see your representation. It's there, you know? So I think that that's part. I think that the expectation of modesty versus, the fashion industry and seeing the fashion industry as something that's only Western and colonized, I seen comments that were saying, "Oh, this is colonized space. So if you're in this space, you're colonized." And I think, coming from having 20 years of being this deeply connected regalia maker and doing all of that work with intentional purpose and then that journey that has taken me on and the role I play in my community and the way that it uplifts me and I uplift it, and then to take all of that and to put it into this other space and to see what I do is so different from Western fashion and to say that I shouldn't take up space in the spaces I choose to be in is crazy.
Mm,
As an Indigenous woman who is a regalia maker, who has strong rooted connections, you're not entitled to tell me the spaces I can and cannot inhabit and to say that that's colonized, because I think that's a colonized perspective in your thinking that says Indigenous people don't have a right to be here or they should choose to do only certain things. They're only good at this and they should stay in these spaces. I don't accept that.
yes.
I don't think I have to.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So powerful. So, so powerful. Absolutely. 100%. This is so deep and it makes me wonder because, being in the public and doing the work in like fashion week, there's all these things that are coming at you. How are you like navigating cultural preservation while you're, engaging in the public, the fashion world? It's a whole, they're different, but they're not, but they're really different. So how are you navigating that?
So it really started off when I did my first New York Fashion Week. And I was really going to a show that was outside of my native communities, which is where I had been doing my first fashion shows. Because when I started to create things, I made my first 2 pieces, which I knew what I wanted to make.
Mhm.
And then after I made those pieces, then I said, "What's next?" And then I started to kinda get in my own head of, "Is it going to be good enough? Is it?" And I spent a day or 2 in that space of just getting nervous and just feeling that imposter syndrome, or what is the expectation and where's the pathway, and I don't know what I'm doing. And then I had to just step back and say, I'm not here to do a bunch of graphic design. I'm not here to be the best seamstress in the world. There are millions of people who sew, there are millions of people who put together things. I am here because I'm a regalia maker who has an understanding of our traditional design theory. And I want to communicate that to make people feel good about what they're wearing and to make my people feel good. And to give value to our indigenous identities and to show that there's differences and to show that there's other native people out there. I lead by that framework of, do I like it? Does it speak to me as somebody deeply connected to my culture? And is it the thing that I want to create? And if I'm comfortable and content with the pieces that I make, then I'll go into any space that I want to, right? And so I had to bring that to New York Fashion Week, and I had to get grounded with my dad, and his good friend was actually, he's a famous artist who's passed on now, Brian Tripp, and he created amazing artwork, and he was well known. And but when I was a young person, I didn't really know that. It was just Brian, and we would go and I would hang out with my dad and his friend, and we'd go on these little day adventures. And I just remember them just totally loving me and being comfortable, like, in your own skin, and being like more of these free people who just freely loved you and invested in you and taught you how to cultivate your own medicine, right? And I didn't realize how important that was until I thought about going into these bigger spaces where I knew I would have to protect that part of me, because I don't want people to have a negative influence in the way I feel about myself. And sometimes that can happen in the fashion world. And also to let things go, is to not make it personal, even if it comes off as personal, to not do anything like that. So I make it a point to really balance myself before I go. I make a point to really make things that make sense to me coming
Mm,
from my background. Does this
mm,
make sense as a regalia maker to make this? And also when I was and when I am, because I'm still a regalia maker, right? But when I'm making pieces, I don't have to make pieces that I've seen before. I can make pieces that I know I can make. And I had this conversation with this elder before, and the Yurok tribe had gotten these amazing pieces back from the Smithsonian from NAGPRA, right? And so we were receiving all of these ceremonial pieces back that had been put in archives for who knows how many years. And the regalia that came back was elaborate and different, and just it was amazing to see, and how impactful it was that people cried and welcome home these items. But I had an idea about a piece of men's regalia I wanted to make, and I asked him, I said, "I've never seen this before. Can I make this?" And he said that indigenous people are some of the most creative people, the things that we wore and the things that we wear is unlike anything else. Adornment is adornment, and that's deeply ingrained across the Americas, right? And whether you choose to call it fashion or you choose to call it something else, we enjoyed it, and it really allowed us this outlet that is so beautiful, and I think so distinguished. Like, you can distinguish native people by that, right? And so I try to carry that energy forward, and know that even in these spaces that are the most sacred to us, I'm not bound by a lot of constriction from other people. So in this other space, why would I constrict myself?
mm. I love that you had said, I had to figure out Like, what am I here for? Like, what is my medicine, my gift in this space? And we can't be everything to everyone. It's just that, everyone has a gift. And I love that you like, this is why. It's like sometimes we have to probably even remind ourselves, because it can get we can easily get spun up in other places and like, "Well, I'm all over the place. Why is that?" So, because I'm trying to do everything. No, and it's funny, I was gonna mention your dad and you said dad. I'm like, we literally were synced because I was like, it's in my mind. I'm like, this is what her dad was saying. Like, be who you are. Just, it may be funny to other people or uncomfortable to other people, but this is who you are. And that is what you're doing so well. And I know he's so proud of you because you are modeling that and you are recognizing that and also just being mindful about how we need to keep balance before we go into the space. I was always told that by like my parents and my some of my relatives that when you go into the public, you need before going in front of them, you need to like almost they don't say a bubble, but I'll use my words like it's like pray and put a bubble around me, like a protective bubble, because you don't know what's going to come at you and it may be love, but it may be also hurtful. So, as long as you have that, you go in. So it's like prepare. You just don't show up and then, you want to mentally, physically, spiritually prepare yourself. And I hear you're doing those things before you get there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly important because I would not be able to focus and put one foot in front of the other if I didn't do that. I would be spinning my wheels and I would have nothing created.
So, given that you've been held, supported, and from different people, from some of the elders, how are you doing that with the future generation? Is there any of your children that are curious about doing this, or other children that are not your biological children who are curious about this? How are you giving back in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, my daughter Sophia was one of my first models, and in her little friend group, because her friend group was always like the second mom. And so, when I first started out, they were very much, my models and bringing them in. And they still like really love to go to the shows and stuff too. We bring the kids as much as we can to shows, and we can't bring them every time or in all spaces, but they like to see the ins and outs and have that input. I also have an intern right now, Sienna Sylvia. She is just recently graduated Del Norte High School. She went to Santa Fe with us to get that experience behind the scenes and what does it take and the hustle and bustle, which she totally loves. She wants to be a designer, she wants to be a model, she wants to help with the production. And so we're getting ready to go to Canada to Calgary up there with building bridges beyond borders is what our show is called, and it's really wanting to get to know the indigenous people in Canada and bridge those connections between tribal people in the states and Canada, and also the play on words with the borders and healing together through the trauma of boarding school, having those conversations and uplifting the youth and giving them space within the shows. The whole point is that when you forge a path is that people come and they take the path, right? And they know how to navigate that. And so she's going to go up to that show too. She's been helping with the planning process so that she gets the connections and she meets the people and she gets an understanding of exactly what she wants to do, right? It doesn't have to be what I've done, but it gives her those opportunities to feel relevant and to have a voice in those spaces because she is relevant and our youth are relevant. And it's all for nothing if we're not giving back in that way. So I'm in an affiliate program. The program that I developed is called Dragonfly People, and it's to increase representation within the fashion industry and native fashion, and to help to promote indigenous models, up and coming models. Whether it's your first time, it's something that you've always wanted to do, and you've never had the experience that you can do that. Up and coming designers, if you want to help with promotion, you're like, "Hey, I have a band or I have
Mhm.
music or I have, this ability," or, "Hey, I just wanna help," and so that is some of the things that I've been helping to promote and put together, and that started even before Dragonfly People came to be its own program, right? And so connecting with indigenous artists in different ways, and having those cultural share components. And yeah, and so she's getting that experience of what that looks like. My daughter Katya, she's my youngest daughter, and she is 10 years old, and she is a phenomenal writer, actually. And so
Mm.
she, the last 2 years, has actually won two writing awards for poems that she did in Humboldt County. And so countywide, she won writing 2 years in a row. And before that, we plugged into a local theater program and collaborated with them to do some work with the youth. And that was Del Arte Theater school. And she was able to write her own poetry and perform that. And I think she was 7 or 8 at the time. Being able to give those youth that space to feel comfortable and to be acknowledged, right? And so, yeah, she's interested in lots of things. She's interested in the fashion, but she's a very good writer.
Well, congratulations to her. I think writing is an art. It is an art. And it's a skill. Two more questions. Or how does your work as a therapist influence your approach in this work and even in leadership as you're, mentoring as well?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I think that's why it was important for me to get into my fashion journey, was because, having that understanding of how do we develop our sense of identity, and how having that representation is so important, and how underrepresented and uneven even that what that looks like in the indigenous fashion world, right? And that was something that really spoke to me, and that whole lens of wellness. And we talked about practice-based knowledge, and
Mhm.
the on the flip side of that is your evidence-based knowledge, right? Prove to
Mhm.
me, how does this work? You show me. And the practice base on the flip side says, how does it not? Right. If we've done this and maintained this way of being for thousands of years, we inherently know from doing and having the result be an intergenerational result that flourished, right? And thrived. And so when your understanding of knowledge catches up to ours, then maybe we can have a conversation, but you are nowhere near to that, right? And I think we see that trend, especially in the natural sciences, when we're learning about the cultural burns and how helpful they actually are to put the fire to the ground and to manage lands in that way, right? When we're looking at the effects of psychology, when we're looking at the plant makeup, and we say, hey, we actually wore maple bark, and maple bark actually heals our cells. It actually is an anti-inflammatory. It actually helps to create positive cell growth, both on our skin and within our brain. And it does all of these other things, and leading universities are actually like studying maple bark now and the healing properties of it, and they are just dipping their fingertip into it, right? Compared to, we already knew the positive outcomes from it, and that's why we wore it when we were on our moon. That's why we wore it in ceremonies where we were staying up and we were um fasting, and we were doing all of these things so that our body inherently got the things that it needed anyways, right? So that's where I started my fashion journey, was to actually create a piece that was a wearable bark skirt, that it was made of leather, but it was crafted in the same way, is to represent, hey, let's wear our bark skirts every day so that we have those healing components in within us. We talk about intergenerational trauma, but that is intergenerational healing that we've done for thousands and thousands of years by treating our bodies how they should be treated, right? And our skin is our largest organ. And so acknowledging that what we put on it is important and it's life changing. It can be life changing, and we should treat it like that. One of the most important things that we can do to shape and change who we are as people in a good way is how we choose to treat the largest organ on our body, which is our skin, right? So we know epigenetics is a thing, because if we didn't acknowledge that, then we wouldn't talk about intergenerational trauma, and we do.
Mm.
So we also have to acknowledge intergenerational healing and the things that we always did before the trauma was here. So that is why I chose the wearable bark skirt to be my first piece of fashion that I ever created. And then the second one was a ball gown, swallow's tail dress that I made, and it has an apron in the front. So you can see that it has the extra piece added to the front of it to represent, hey, this is putting your best. Right? Our best is our ceremonial dresses. And so, how do I represent putting your best out there? And I thought a ball gown with that's two pieces, that you get that feeling of feeling special, and that this is, you know, for a purpose, and you don't just put this on, but you put this on for a purpose, and that can, that's your balance, it's your everyday, and then that's your special. And that's what I said. It was those two pieces. I knew I wanted to make those ones. And then after that, then, you have to go back and do what feels right.
Mm. At this point in your life journey, what are you still learning about yourself?
That is a really good question. I mean, there are so many different experiences I think that I want to have. And also, I think that larger idea of how other natives take in information,
Mm.
and where we can find common ground as far as supporting each other. Also, we're supposed to be lifelong learners. So
Right?
even in your challenges, it's just about figuring out a positive outcome for you, right? So when you have a challenge, figuring out what the positive outcome is. One of my favorite lessons, so this is one that I feel like I've started to figure out, but I like to apply it, is that other people's opinion of you is none of your business.
Mm.
And I heard that when I was young, and that's something you're like, "Yeah, right," or how could somebody's opinion of you not be your business, right? But when you actually start to understand that you're not gonna be everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. And actually, fun fact, that psychology shows that no matter who you are, there's 15% of people who just don't care for you. And so when you could be the most perfect person by anyone's standards and still not be liked by everybody. So when they say, somebody's opinion of you is none of your business, well, sometimes it really isn't. Right. And so there's freedom in that. When you have obstacles, there's always the other side, which is maybe you don't need that. Maybe you're free of that. Right. Or maybe you don't have to take that on, right? And so I always try to find that part that's like, what's the freeing part of this? What is the flip side of this?
Mm, I love that. I love that you put stats to it too. I personally feel this is like my opinion about the 15%, and I really feel like it's energetically like you when you're in a room, there's always something about how you are drawn to certain people, and others you just there's a vibe. You're just like, I don't, or you maybe try to connect and it just like a magnet on both ends, you just kind of repel away. And so I don't know. I think there's something there that we don't see and feel, but our body knows like this person's not good for you.
Yeah, and it's also like totally okay if I'm like
Yeah.
if I'm the 15, if you're in the 15% that doesn't like that's okay too because you have to have 15% somewhere. So, you just have to
Yes.
acknowledge that that exists and you know,
At least
it,
it's not 25%. It just underscores again what your dad was saying. Just be who you are and just have, accept all of that, right?
yeah.
So I always like to ask folks when at the end, what do you want our listeners to take away? What wisdom do you want them to take away from your story? Maybe you haven't said it yet. You said so much that is just strong, powerful, and people will take what they want. But what's one thing that you really would like for them to walk away from this time that we shared?
I think that knowing what it is that really like makes your life worth living or gives your life meaning and having like that deeply like connected to you, right? And so it could be different. We all have different gifts, but if you understand the that it makes you feel good, or you understand that, you know, then you have to kind of operate the world like that. Is that maybe you're holding that close and you're the only one, but that you have that contentment, so you don't need it other places, and that actually does allow you to connect to other people or to disconnect when you need to. And so you're not constantly like searching for that in other places, but it helps to also like build community because you also like feel good, right? And you can go about the world like doing that and also having an understanding of what your story is and centering yourself in your story and also not it's not always our job to center in other people's stories. So if you don't relate or you know that when you view something it's something different. Good. That's okay that it's different, right? Because that's not my story, and I can appreciate stories that are not my stories too, right? And that, even within the indigenous community, that we have to be advocates for each other because we're not all the same. We have to stop disguising lateral violence as Indian humor, and when we see successful women, we, tend to put them down. I see that with in the modeling industry, where the women are there to help support somebody's vision, and then there's all of these comments about the model, but somebody else can wear it, and people say that's deeply impactful. Well, all of our women are deeply impactful and it's okay that they take up these spaces, right? So I think, we have to get out of our head when we use that excuse of Indian humor to harm each other, and that's not okay. But I don't know, I'm just having a lot of fun with everything.
I love that. We could go on and on. I know we can, but I do have a couple of fun, light-hearted fire round questions.
Mhm.
Um, so one is, what's in your purse right now?
Oh, which one? I feel like I have a lot of purses. I have one I just grabbed that has some snacks and it also has like some name badges of the places I've been to recently. And I try to bring my wallet in every place and a couple pairs of ears.
Well, you're my kind of gal because earrings and snacks, I'm right by you. What's your favorite shell or bead to work with?
I really love abalone because we have a abalone woman story, and it's a story of like of empowerment too, because she went through something, right? And also how it reflects different colors, and it can be a lot of different things.
Yeah, I love that shell. When you said that, it made me think about one time a friend from the coastal tribe had given me these big shells, and I realized like I could wear it with brown, with blue, with green, with black, with white. Like it matches literally every outfit. What's your late night creative snack?
Oh my goodness, I really like popsicles. I really like the fruit popsicles, but yeah. So like
What
pineapple
about
popsicles, coconut popsicles.
Oh, that's good to know. Song you blast when you're beading or sewing.
Oh, I don't listen to a lot of music when I'm creating on my own because I like to have my thoughts freely flowing. But songs I blast pretty regularly is anything Kendrick.
Ah, I knew you were going to say that you didn't have music when you were working. I just knew that. I'm like, she probably is like in the quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A quote or word you live by.
Gosh, that's such a good one. I think I would have to do like my dad when he just says like just brush it off, right? And like physically, and like a duck like water, right? Like just let it roll off. But make sure you brush it off yourself.
Favorite regalia making tool.
Oh my goodness. That is a hard one. Oh, that one's a hard one. I would say the one that my leather all, probably because it makes things a lot easier, but the one that has, like, the highest importance where I growl at my household members, my family, my household members, is, my scissors. "Please don't use my scissors for anything else."
um, what? Oh, this one. A dream model you'd love to wear your design.
Oh, Ashley Collingbull was supposed to walk for me in Santa Fe, and then she was filming, so she had a last minute cancellation. And for her top alone, I think I put 60 hours of beadwork into her top. So it got worn once and it sold. So I'm like, she'll never be able to wear the piece that I made specifically for her,
Oh,
but I would love to have her rock for me sometime.
last one. Ceremony or tradition you wish more people knew about.
That is a good one. I think for us here, we had a kick dance that they don't really do anymore, but our kick dance was what we call a brush dance, which is to heal a sick child, and everybody comes together and they pray and sing, and that's how their ceremony goes. But a kick dance would essentially be a ceremony like that, but for people training to be Indian doctors and stuff. And so sometimes, they're the ones doing the ceremonies, but we have to think too, is that sometimes they needed their ceremonies done for them too. You need people to pray for you too, because you're doing this really heavy work, right? And so that's one that kind of went away that I wish that we started to do again and to feel comfortable doing that. I think it's such a powerful thing that sometimes it's scary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. All the listeners that are listening to us, I just ask you to come and join us to take a deep breath in, exhale. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your stories. I really enjoyed connecting with you. Any final words before we sign off?
I think just to treat each other good, and that think about that, success and happiness isn't like a pie, right? That there's not, a certain amount of it, but that it is like we all have our own pie. So let us enjoy our pie, is that, as a way to support each other in this journey.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I hope I get to see you in August. Are you going to come?
Yeah, I'm gonna come down
Okay.
there. I love Santa Fe. I love New Mexico. It's
For the
so,
Indian market?
yeah, it's so powerful to just like have that experience in that space.
Well, I hope I run into you there. So I will be there. And so I'll look out for you. And thank you again. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Choo.